Luciferian globalists seek to abolish national sovereignty and to create a new world order to control every person. On this edition of the Endtime Show, Gary Ka joins me to analyze the prophesied global government, religion, and economic systems and how they could affect our upcoming presidential election. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Robbins with Endtime Ministries. I do thank you for joining me on this very special edition of the Endtime Show. I've got a very special guest with me today. Gary Ka is the former Europe and Middle East trade specialist for the Indiana government. And while in that position, he traveled extensively overseas, working closely with American embassies on trade-related projects. And he's written 2 best-selling books detailing his experiences and exposing the one world interfaith movement. His books are En Route to Global Occupation and The New World Religion. Of course, most of you know that those are like candy stick issues when it comes to Bible prophecy. And Gary is also a national and international talk show guest and speaker. And we're going to provide Gary's full bio below and all of our social networking sites. And so his website is garyka.org. So we're going to get to Gary in just a moment, but first let me mention Birch Gold. You know, there's a lot at stake in this upcoming election, and regardless of who's sitting in the White House, the fuse on the economy, it's already been lit. Even 4 years of a conservative presidency, it's not going to be enough really to turn the tide on our $35 trillion national debt, right? And if the left wins, it's like throwing gas on a fire. You don't have too much control over the election's outcome. God's going to be in control of that. But what you can do right now is to protect your savings by diversifying into gold with the help of Birch Gold Group. For thousands of years, gold has stood firm in the face of greedy governments, economic upheavals, global strife, and it can protect you now. Certainly an option. Birch Gold will help you convert an IRA or a 401k into an IRA in physical gold, tax-free and penalty-free, and doesn't cost you a penny out of pocket. In the past 4 years, the buying power of the U.S. dollar has declined while the price of gold has increased 40%. So that's a coincidence. No, I don't think so. Visit birchgold.com/endtime and get your free info kit on gold. And trust Birch Gold to protect your savings. Visit birchgold.com/endtime today. Okay, everybody, I want to let you know very quickly before we bring on Gary about a conference that my wife and I will be doing in Providence, Rhode Island this weekend. We'll be at the Hope City Church, 372 Wayland Avenue. That's in Providence. And this will be Saturday, November 2nd at 6 p.m. I'll be teaching on the Green Horsemen in World War III. And then Sunday afternoon, that's November 3rd at 5 p.m., we'll be doing Breaking Prophecy News, and then we'll have a time of question and answers after that. So certainly looking forward to seeing everybody in Providence, Rhode Island. This is my last prophecy conference of the year. And then first week of January, it takes off again like a shot out of a gun. So got a little break here. Very thankful for that. But very important guest here today. I want to welcome a good friend of my father-in-law, Irvin Baxter, a good friend of the Endtime Show, and Gary Ka, and he's with Hope for the World Ministries. Gary, thank you so much for joining me on today's edition of the Endtime Show.
Dave, it's my pleasure to be with you. Good to see you.
Absolutely. And I want to let everybody know, again, Gary Ka was on the radio many times with my father-in-law, way back when we were in Richmond, Indiana. And then when we moved to Dallas, we kind of lost track of each other. But I heard his name brought up just a few weeks ago, and I thought, Gary Ka, where do I know him from? And then I thought, well, we used to carry his products. He was on the radio many times with my father-in-law. We used to carry his products and books and things here at the ministry. And so a very, very reliable source on Bible prophecy and world government, world religion, different things. And so his website is garyka.org if you'd like to find some of those products. And again, really, really informative individual, and a well-read individual, and you're going to see that here in a minute. But okay, Gary, so let's just walk right down through here, because I know our time is just going to go so quickly. But I tell you what, though, before we do that, I want you to introduce yourself to the audience. In other words, just give a brief background. In other words, what got you to where you're at now? Because I know you've been through so much. You've held so many positions. There's so many accolades. But a brief, what got you into this, and what got you to the point where you're at now?
Sure. First of all, I'm the son of European immigrants. My father grew up in Croatia. When he was 12 years old, he and his family and some relatives fled from the communists coming in, became refugees. They lost everything they had. They ended up in Austria, up in the mountains, thinking they were safe there for a while, only to find out that he was in a boarding school where the Nazis were preparing young people to send them to the Eastern Front as cannon fodder for Hitler. So the day he found out about that, he and a friend jumped out of a two-story window and ran for their lives. So Dad fled from the communists at age 12 and from the Nazis at age 13. My mother grew up under Hitler in Nazi Germany with a father who was very outspoken against Hitler in their small town, to the point where two secret police came to their little village looking for him once. And if not for the fact that the mayor sent them in the wrong direction intentionally, and then got hold of my grandpa and said, "You've got to get out of here. They're looking for you." If it wasn't for that, who knows what would have happened there. But anyway, after the war, my parents got married. They moved to the States. I was born in Ohio. And then jumping over many years, eventually, as you mentioned earlier, I became the Europe and Middle East trade specialist for the Lieutenant Governor of Indiana. In Indiana, the Lieutenant Governor resides over the Department of Commerce. And one of the activities of commerce here in our state is to promote exports to try to create more jobs here on the home front. And so I was a point man overseas for them, traveling all over the world, helping our companies get into the export market. So I was on the payroll of the state government, but my meetings overseas were organized by our embassies, by the State Department. And so everywhere I traveled, which was over 20 countries, I met a lot of people and worked closely with people at our embassies, in the commercial sections of our embassies. And pretty early on in my job, I was surprised to learn that I would say a majority of the people who I met at the embassies were globalists. And they seemed to be much more in line with the UN and favorable toward the UN than they were to having any interest in defending our national sovereignty. And that did shock me. And so I began asking questions. And I learned that if you're quiet sometimes and just let people talk, it's amazing what they'll tell you. And I didn't want to reveal where I was coming from right away, or else I felt they'd clam up. And so over the next 3.5 years or so, I got to find out who some of the key players were in the One World movement, both in the private sector, international business leaders. Some of them I actually met with, and others actually working for the embassies. And I do want to say there were some Christians working at the embassies. And whenever we find each other, it almost be like a celebration, because they were in a minority and still are. And so that's kind of how I came into all of this. And then I began doing some digging, and I felt convicted about 3 years into this, felt convicted by the Lord that I really needed to take a stand, because if I didn't, how then could I expect other people to do so when he put me in a position where I learned about all of this firsthand? And it also took me back to a commitment I made as a young man shortly after accepting Jesus as my Savior. At the age of 11, while sitting in my classroom in Kettering, Ohio, I remember praying to the Lord that if anything were to ever happen in this country, like what happened in World War II in Europe, I would take a stand regardless of the cost. And so I felt that now was the time to make good on that. And, but where do you start? Do you stand on a street corner in downtown Indianapolis and start warning people against the New World Order, or what? And so I prayed, and within 2 weeks or so, the Lord opened up doors. It was amazing. Speaking at a Bible study in our Secretary of State's office, and then it just snowballed from there. And eventually I left my job, spent 6 years doing further research. It culminated in my book, En Route to Global Occupation, which has been out now for almost 33 years and was warning people. And the things happening right now is what I warned about in the book. We're living in amazing times. They can be frightening if you don't know the Lord. If you know the Lord, you know we're coming down closer and closer to the wire and ultimately to his return.
Amen. So when we talk about world government, you and I both know the Bible prophesies about many times over about a world government that will be established just prior to the second coming of Jesus Christ. And I'm glad you mentioned that. If we didn't know the Lord, yeah, I would probably be fearful. But we don't teach prophecy. You don't. We don't. We don't teach prophecy from a fear perspective. I'm not trying to create fear to get somebody to do something. We teach prophecy as hope, faith, and love. And the Bible says God didn't give us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and of a sound mind. And so I hold to that scripture, like I just super glue myself to that because I'm so thankful. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so when we talk about world government, our audience is very versed on that. We talk about it all the time. It's one of my candy stick issues. But I made the statement early on of a Luciferian world government. And sometimes when you do that, people's eyes glaze over like, yeah, he said Luciferian. I don't know what that means. I understand the world government these guys teach about, but what about the Luciferian aspect of that? Could you speak to that for just a moment?
Sure. And I began seeing that component. There was a strong hint of it when I was working for the government, because the one thing I consistently found through those who favored and empowered United Nations and ultimately an all-out world government was that they were not very fond of Bible-believing Christians or politically conservative Jews. They simply weren't. And that's one of the early things that threw up flags in my mind. And so as I began digging into that, eventually I put together a list of 5 reasons why a world government would be dangerous for Christians and freedom-loving people. And we actually have that posted on our website somewhere. It's called The Danger in Losing Our U.S. Freedoms and Sovereignty to a Global System of Government. But the last of those 5 points that I mentioned is the fact that this is a very anti-Christian Luciferic movement. And in my book, I actually lay out the theology or the doctrine, the dogma behind this, what these people actually believe at the highest levels. Now, the lower levels, these people are duped. They think they may somehow be involved in helping to bring about world peace and world unity, and they're just the foot soldiers. But as you go up the ladder in this movement, the ugly side of this rears its head, and it becomes obvious to those who are aware of it. I want to share with you excerpts from a letter. Is written by Albert Pike on July 14th, 1889, to the various supreme councils of the world involving the highest levels of the secret societies. And so I'm just going to read this, about 3 paragraphs. Bear with me. This is very strong stuff, not for the faint-hearted, but I want people to understand.
Yeah, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I'm looking for, Gary.
Okay. He wrote, if Lucifer were not God, would Adonai, the God of the Christians, whose deeds prove his cruelty, perfidy, and hatred of man, barbarism and repulsion for science, would Adonai and his priests calumniate him? Yes, Lucifer is God, and unfortunately, Adonai is also God. For the eternal law is that there is no light without shade, no beauty without ugliness, no white without black. For the absolute can only exist as 2 gods. Darkness being necessary to light, to serve as its foil, as the pedestal is necessary to the statue and the brake to the locomotive. In analogical and universal dynamics, one can only lean on that which will resist. Thus, the universe is balanced by 2 forces which maintain its equilibrium, the force of attraction and that of repulsion. These two forces exist in physics, philosophy, and religion. And the scientific reality of the divine dualism is demonstrated by the phenomena of polarity and by the universal law of sympathies and antipathies. That is why the intelligent disciples of Zoroaster, as well as after them the Gnostics, the Manichaeans, and the Templars, have admitted as the only logical metaphysical conception the system of the two divine principles fighting eternally, and one cannot believe the one inferior in power to the other. Thus, the doctrine of Satanism is a heresy, and the true and pure philosophic religion is the belief in Lucifer, the equal of Adonai. But Lucifer, God of light and God of good, is struggling for humanity against Adonai, the God of darkness and evil. End quote. I mean, they turn the truth upside down. And, you know, many people I've spoken with in the last few months, they say it seems like good is now evil and evil is good. In the last 10 years or so, it's accelerated. And what was once good, people now frown upon. And what was once evil is moving forward in the name of tolerance and compassion. And that's by design. It's leading us into a system of utter lawlessness. And it's interesting in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, in the NIV, it refers to the Antichrist as the man of lawlessness. And that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing a trend toward lawlessness. And Pike believed that ultimately he and his followers would help to liberate mankind and set mankind free from the so-called bondage that Adonai had placed them under by calling on them to follow his commandments and his rules for living. And ultimately, you know, this will lead to chaos and the reign of the Antichrist. And so it's just preposterous what these people believe. But most of the world, 90% of the world, is not aware that this is really what's at the core of the New Age movement of occultism and of globalization. These are the people who are calling the shots, and they're tied in with many of the top banking institutions in the world. And the secret societies at a high level are essentially married with some of the banking institutions. So there's no lack of funding. You've got George Soros and people like that with major foundations, the Rockefellers. They're pouring money into this globalization effort. And so short of a miracle from God and a massive, quick awakening of not just the American people, but the people around the world, this is going to come in fairly quickly, I feel.
Yeah, I think that when we talk about world government, when we talk about secret societies and, you know, enthroning Lucifer as a beacon of light and all these different things, that some people think, oh, that's, you know, the conspiracy word. There's no such thing as secret societies and the skull and bones and all this other stuff. But that stuff's very, very real. And some of these people, I think it has went past money for them. They've got more money than they could ever spend. Now it's power, and it's a religion to them. Like you said, the New Age religion and things like that. They believe that they are doing the work of this spirit of the spirit of. They say, you know, not Satan but Lucifer. But the fact of the matter is that it's all in that direction and in that mindset. And the Bible says in Revelation 13 that the dragon, or Satan, will give this world governing body, this entity, its seat, power, and its great authority, Revelation 13. And so you can see it all playing out right here before us. And there is the creation of a world governing body. Again, our audience is very well aware of that. The United Nations is the seat of that world governing body, and how it was created to be a communistic, socialistic, one world governing body from its inception. But I wanted to take everybody and have you define that. Just take them one level deeper in this, in that it's a religion to them. And the Bible says in the end, in Revelation 13, that they will actually worship the dragon or worship Satan before it's all over with. We're already there with these people that sit at the helm of this thing. And so I wanted everybody to understand how diabolical it is before we got into the Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, and how it could affect our election. Yeah, the Luciferian.
If I just add to that, and you hit on it, if this was simply about economics and finances and power as far as that goes, it would have died out some time ago. But this has been passed on for a number of generations. And that can only be the case if it's motivated by religion, by a spiritual underlying principle. And that's really the glue that holds this together, and what a lot of people are missing. And on the major networks, some of the more conservative ones, they'll go so far, but then no further. They don't get to the underlying religious motivation behind this. They stay away from that. They'll touch on economic and political developments and maybe taking a stand on some of those things, but people don't really fully get what's at stake here and the spiritual battle. And that is prophesied in Revelation chapter 13. It doesn't use the term world government, but it really describes there an end times global political system that will use its economic and military power to enforce a type of religious worship. Ultimately, Lucifer, Satan, he wants to be worshiped. He desires to be worshiped. And if he has to force people to that point, he'll do that, and so ultimately that's what it's about. And I think, we were talking off the air before. I believe one way, maybe the main way that globalists are going to try to usher this thing in will be through a major global war conflict. Yeah. And so I can comment on that too later on if you want me to, but yeah. I just wanted to say those things.
So with that, let's segue into that. We'll go into that before we go into the election and everything that it could happen. But we've laid out the scenario. I've laid out the scenario many times on different radio and talk show programs and different things about that the globalists, they've got to have a crisis to get their agenda, to realize their agenda of a world governing body. And they've had World War I, World War II. But lay out the scenario for me about what could come to pass, the extent they would want to go to, maybe to finally get the world government they really, really desire.
Yeah, the more crises, the better. If you had an economic collapse, if you had a pandemic, although I don't think that will be the main way because people have caught on to that, at least here in the U.S., but any kind of crisis that's global. And of course, the biggest would be World War III, especially if you have the potential of nuclear weapons involved. And as you stated, World War I, if you think about it, it culminated in the League of Nations being formed afterwards, the first kind of public step in the direction of a global governing body. Then World War II resulted in a bigger step, the United Nations, which really is a framework for world government. And they're seeking to gain the power of a world government, and they've actually taken some big steps in that direction here recently. And so to put them over the top, though, it would make sense, given the trend of the last 100 years or so, that a third world war might terrify the population of the world to the point where they would then finally be willing to embrace a full-blown system of world government under the guise of maintaining world peace. If they can become convinced, look, we have to have a world government to prevent countries from fighting each other, and this is the way to finally bring in world peace, and people naively might buy into that. Now, I quoted Albert Pike earlier. I want to share a second quote with you. This is from page 144 of my book, En Route to Global Occupation. In a letter to the Italian revolutionary leader, Giuseppe Mazzini, dated August 15, 1871, Albert Pike, who at the time was the leader of the Illuminist activities in the United States and a key figure in the secret societies, he shared how a future conflict between two future superpowers might be sparked and come into play, and how that would be used. So this is a direct quote now. He said, "We shall unleash the nihilists," and by that I believe he meant terrorists. "We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a great social cataclysm, which in all its horror will show clearly to all nations the effect of absolute atheism, the origin of savagery and of most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere, the people, forced to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries, will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitudes, disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will be from that moment on without direction and leadership, anxious for an ideal but without knowledge where to send their adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer brought finally out into public view. A manifestation which will result from a general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. End quote. So in other words, creating a huge global crisis, and Christianity may be being blamed for not being able to stop it, and atheism and the terrorists being viewed as, the main reason behind it for starting it. And then in steps someone, I don't know if openly they'll declare Lucifer as God or if they'll be more subtle than that, but clearly somebody stepping on the scenes. And we can see the world trending in this lawless direction, as we already said. And that comes straight from the pits of hell, from Lucifer himself, the lawless one, if you will. So, when people say, it's just conspiracy theory, I heard someone recently say yesterday's conspiracy theories are today's headlines.
That's true.
And to a large extent, it's true. I was writing about this 33 years ago, and now we see it happening in real time. But also, if you think about it, from the beginning of time, we've been in a spiritual battle. Lucifer rebelled against God, against Adonai, along with a third of the angels, and they were cast out of the presence of the Lord. That was a conspiracy. He conspired with them against God. Then when the creation of man took place, when God created man, it didn't take long before, again, Satan came in the form of a serpent, tempting man to rebel against God. Again, conspiring against God, this time with man. And then we had the building of the Tower of Babel. And God intervened because it would have led to the first known world government of its day. And God understood this would not be good. It would enslave mankind. So God scattered the people and gave them different languages, and it just continued from there down to the present day. So all of history, you could argue, has involved a conspiracy, a spiritual conspiracy, and that's what underlies all of this.
Exactly. Well, Gary, I'm coming up to a break here, and man, I'm looking forward to the conversation on the backside of this. We'll dive right back into it on the other side of the break.
A reminder of the breaking news this hour. At least 22 people are reported to have died in a strike in Gaza.
The rise of Islam.
I'm trying to bring answers for so many families desperately.
Is the Israel-Hamas-Iran conflict World War III? So let's talk about the four horsemen. What do these horses symbolize? These are the four spirits of the heavens which go forth from standing before the Lord of all the earth. In the end time, the true people of God will not be weak, anemic, and defeated. These prophesied events are revealing we are quickly approaching the time of the Great Tribulation right now.
Now streaming on OneSource and available to order at endtime.com/screen. Go to endtime.com/screen or call 800-ENDTIME.
What if you could understand Bible prophecy? Dave Robbins, the host of the Endtime Show's TV and radio programs, is holding a free prophecy conference near you. Gain peace and understanding about what the Bible says concerning end-time prophecy. Call 1-800-ENDTIME or go to endtime.com/events to see when Dave will be in a location near you.
Welcome back, everybody, and I'm joined with my good friend Gary Kah from Hope for the World Ministry, and we're talking about the Luciferian world government. And Gary, very well-read individual, and I'm sure you can tell that by the first half hour. But in this segment here, Gary, I want to get into the Summit of the Future and the Pact for the Future, what that did to the United Nations, and I want to tie, before we're done, we've got to tie that into the election coming up next Tuesday. So give this Luciferian world government we're talking about, They just had a meeting here in September, the Summit of the Future, but it resulted in the Pact for the Future. Speak to the Pact for the Future for just a little bit.
Yeah, this had been in the planning stages for probably about 2 years or so. And we learned shortly before that meeting took place, which was on September 22nd and 23rd at the UN, as a prelude to the annual meeting of the UN General Assembly. We learned that it was pretty much decided back in March of this year. Everything was laid out, it was decided on, and so the goal was to introduce this pact for the future at the Summit of the Future, and using a technique called silence procedure or something like that. They were able to introduce it, and if they didn't get immediate opposition to it publicly, when the gavel drops, it's done. This whole thing was over in like 5 minutes. Maybe the most important thing that has taken place in the world this past year, because this pact for the future gives the UN emergency powers, specifically the UN Secretary General, emergency dictatorial-like powers if the UN declares an international state of emergency. So then the next question is, what could such an emergency be, right? It could be an economic collapse. It could be World War III, a nuclear weapon being dropped. It could be a global cyber attack. It could be a pandemic. It could be all kinds of things. If there's an international emergency as a result of this pact that was approved back on September 22nd, Antonio Guterres essentially would be the dictator of the world. There was no mention of this that I'm aware of in the mass media. Now, a week or so before, I saw about 5 congressmen that did a press conference. One of them involved the Texas congressman who was Donald Trump's White House doctor. What's his name? Ronnie Jackson. He was one of the people there who spoke out against this, warning people, but it got almost no media coverage. So hardly no one was even aware that this took place. Very dangerous. And the bottom line is, if there's an international crisis and the UN declares an international state of emergency, if your country is a member nation of the United Nations, you will be obligated to abide by whatever comes down from the UN. The only way around that would be if you withdraw your membership from the UN as a country and definitely stop funding it. Right now, the U.S. is the #1 funder of the UN. A lot of people aren't aware of that. So we're helping to support our own demise and doing our national sovereignty. And just the fact that it's on U.S. soil, I wish that wasn't the case, but it is. And just a little side note, the property upon which the UN is built was donated by the Rockefeller family. And it was, at the time, not worth a lot of money because it was a swamp. But once the UN building was built there, the Rockefellers did real well afterwards because they owned a lot of the land around there as well. But anyway, it's a lot of your old globalist money right from the beginning that helped to fund the UN. And the intent from the beginning was to eventually turn the UN into a global government. And if that fails, which it could, then they would work through a new global governing body headquartered overseas, either in Europe or the Middle East. So that is still a possibility, and we'll see how it unfolds. But again, it blew me away that there was nothing even on the conservative media networks that I saw. And we've been out there for 6 or 8 months, sounding the alarm on this, telling people, write your congressman, let them know about this, and you just hear crickets, nothing.
Yeah. So one thing that I've looked at is that the Pact for the Future kind of turbocharged. It is like a UN 2.0, and it gives the emergency powers to Guterres, but it kind of is a shot in the arm to the Sustainable Development Goals, which is obviously the United Nations socialistic blueprint to govern the planet and everybody in it. So there's a lot that is apocalyptic and diabolical. It's the next step, if you will, up with more power for the United Nations and this global governing body.
Yeah, one of the reasons they can give for declaring a state of international emergency is a major climate event, and that's actually stated as well. And so we actually put together a briefing on the Summit of the Future here. You can see it there. This went out in early September. And some things that we stumbled onto that were driving forces behind this summit. I just wanted to mention this one because this may surprise some people, maybe not. But there were 3 organizations that were cooperating behind the scenes to set the stage for the Summit of the Future. They were collaborating. And one of them was the Vatican. And I'll just share this paragraph out of this briefing. On March 4th and 5th, the Vatican's Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences hosted a workshop on the Summit of the Future with, get this, with participation from the Muslim Council of Elders, as well as regional and global banking representatives, including the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, the African Development Bank, also former and current UN officials, governmental ministers, and academic experts. So they were involved. I mean, this goes all the way to the top, to the papacy. The Vatican was involved with this. The other major organization, one of the other two, was the Climate Governance Commission, known as the CGC. Mm-hmm. This is a working group attached to a larger body known as the Global Governance Forum. And they're a major player when it comes to the environment. In fact, one of their principal stated goals in one of the reports that they put out was to establish a global environmental agency, and I'm quoting, to serve as the central node for climate and for general global environmental Earth system governance, end quote. And then also they want to establish an international court for the environment, which would work alongside the Global Environmental Agency. They're also proposing a United Nations Parliamentary Assembly, basically an international parliament that would also be promoting all of this stuff, and then funding for the UN. Because if you add a global layer of government, this has to be funded somehow. And a lot of people aren't thinking about that. So if they're tired of taxes, you haven't seen anything yet. Yeah. The UN, an empowered UN or global governing body will need money to run this international government. So those are just a few of the highlights, and I could go on and on, but we put that in the briefing that we prepared for the Summit of the Future because we wanted people to know who some of the main players were behind the scenes. This thing didn't just pop up, on the 22nd and 23rd of September out of nowhere. Right. It was in the making for a long time leading up to that event.
Exactly. How can people get those documents that you put out?
Actually, I posted this on our website at garycod.org. Okay. It's one of the first 2 articles that pops up. But people can also subscribe to our research news journal, and you can do that at our website as well. And then you can get this. But we wanted to get this out fast, quickly to everybody, so we just posted it right at our website, along with an article called "Going for It All." And so people can be looking for that and read it in much more detail.
Very good. With the time that we have left, Gary, I want to go to the election coming up next Tuesday. Probably, I shouldn't say probably, in my opinion, and I know we say this every year, but probably the most important election in the history of our nation because, in my opinion, the most salient issue in this upcoming election is globalism versus nationalism. Will we have an administration that will yield up our sovereignty to this world governing body, which has now been turbocharged and given more power, or, like you said, will we have an administration that will go in and pull us out of the United Nations and lop off the tentacles of that and defund them and stop the funding? That's really what we're staring at here in this election, and we could go deep off into the woods on all the little different issues, but that's the huge one. Somebody needs to sink their teeth into that. And so when you look at this scenario we just laid out with this Luciferian world governing body, one person on the ballot is 100% on board with this, supports it in every way. The other person on the ballot that's going to sit as the commander-in-chief come next January 20th when they're inaugurated is to America first, is not a globalist. And so that's where we're at. So I think everybody knows that Donald Trump, not a globalist. When he was in the first time, he's pulling us out of world government and pulling us the Paris Climate Agreement and many things. We know what Biden would do. We know what the Biden-Harris administration do. But I think that if Harris is elected, I think it's going to go way beyond that, because I don't think people truly know Kamala Harris. Can you speak to that? Because obviously I won't speak to you again before Tuesday, and you're going to take a break. And so the platform is yours, my friend.
Yeah, so much to say here. This is a very important election, because if it goes the wrong way, if Harris gets in, it tips the scales. We're going to move toward global government very quickly, in my view. Trump, you get what you see. You know, with Harris, there's a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. Everything about Trump is pretty much out in the open. Trump definitely is pro-Constitution, pro-free enterprise, wants to keep the U.S. a sovereign nation. In my view, might be the only person right now that has a chance of getting in as president who might have the backbone to actually pull us out of the UN or to stop funding the UN, because it's a very anti-U.S., anti-Israel organization. In fact, just for a moment, I want to throw this in. I remember a few years ago, a statistic that shocked me. In 1 year alone, the UN issued something like 20 resolutions of condemnation against Israel and only 2 or 3 against the rest of the world combined. You know, and that kind of says it all. I mean, that's where they're coming from. And Guterres, who's the UN Secretary General right now, is the worst of the worst, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, Trump, I think, would have the backbone to stand up against these people. If Harris comes in, she comes from a Marxist background. Her father was a Marxist university professor. She first came into prominence in San Francisco with George Soros backing. It was George Soros and a lot of his cronies who got behind her. So this goes back quite a ways. And of course, more recently, the Obamas, who are still powerful behind the scenes, have helped to prop her up. They are globalists. She is hyper pro-abortion. She's running advertisements promoting abortion. And so, you know, she's not hiding it. And the reason she's doing that is because, unfortunately and sadly, a majority of Americans favor abortion, at least in some markets in the U.S. And so she believes if she can make that a big enough issue, people will actually vote for her. We've seen what she's done with the border. Millions of illegals coming in.
Let me stop there. Gary, is the border part of this global governing thing? The open border, that's part of the global governing scenario, right?
Well, it is, because ultimately their goal is to regionalize the world economically and politically. And they want to make the U.S., Canada, and Mexico a region of the world just like the European market is, and then take those regions of the world and merge them together into a world government system. And the thinking behind it is, if you can break down the idea of national sovereignty and create these regional economic political units, then it will be easier to take those units into world government. And of course, Trump has fought that as well vehemently, and that's why they can't stand the man, and they've thrown everything at him to try to stop him. But right now, this election is very, very close. And I think in a lot of states, it's going to be, you know, within 1 or 2%. And if I may, just to comment on the swing states, and I know we've heard this probably talked on to death, but what some people are missing is these 7 major swing states, they're all dominated by 1 or 2 very large cities. For example, in Arizona, Phoenix has way over half of the population of the whole state, the Phoenix area. So by saturating that market with tens of millions of dollars of advertisements If they can get 60% of the people, for example, in Phoenix to vote Democrat, it's very difficult for the rest of Arizona, the rest of the state, to overcome that. They might have to vote 70% in favor of Trump. Same thing in Georgia. Atlanta is such a dominant city. You've got about 6 million people living in and around Atlanta. So if they can dominate Atlanta, then there's a decent chance they can win all of Georgia. Same thing in Nevada with Las Vegas and so forth. So for Democrats, they've made their strategy quite simple. They need to win about 7 to 9 major cities in a big way. And if they can, and if they can carry most of the swing states as a result, then they will win the election. So that's really where a big part of the battle is being fought. So people who are watching right now, if you live in Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, please get out and vote, because it may come down to a few hundred votes in some of these states. And I know that there are a lot of tricks that can be pulled by this Marxist element. I'm hoping for a free and fair election. And I believe if that is the case, that Trump stands a real chance of winning. It's not a given, but he has a chance. But everybody's got to get out and vote, because the far left, they're turning out in record numbers. And the tragedy is, in the last major election, I think it was 40% of evangelicals did not vote, something like that, if I remember. And that's, and then people complain afterwards when the world goes, when the U.S. goes, down the tubes. But in my opinion, if you didn't get out and vote, you don't have a right to complain. So get out. You don't have to like and be in love with Trump's personality. I'm not. But when you look at the policies he stands for and wants to keep us as a free nation with freedom of speech and freedom of religion, when the other side has no intention of that. And all you have to do is look at their track record and what they're proposing. So this is extremely important.
So the pact for the future, this Luciferian world government passes the pact for the future. Didn't the Biden and Harris administration support that? Weren't they kind of maybe some of the drivers behind it at some point, right?
Yeah, it actually goes back a few months earlier to the World Health Assembly that met in Geneva, Switzerland, back from May 27th to June 1st. And so the first order of business for globalists this year was to empower the World Health Organization. And they wanted to do that at the 77th meeting of the World Health Assembly. And so they proposed various amendments intended to give the World Health Organization almost unlimited authority. And the Biden administration was involved in actually helping to draft some of those amendments. In fact, there were 13 of the most important amendments. The Biden and Harris administration helped to present those. Secondly, something else people need to be aware of is that the WHO has full immunity rights and can't be taken to court, meaning there's no way to prosecute World Health Organization officials for wrongdoing under international law. To me, that's criminal. How can that be the case? But it is. And then also, people need to be aware that the WHO is a sub-agency of the UN. So why am I bringing this up? Well, the World Health Organization did not get everything they wanted back in May because a lot of governors woke up. In fact, 26 governors, I believe, sent letters to the Biden administration that they will absolutely oppose this with everything they have. Also, 49 senators and 22 U.S. attorneys general from 22 states all strongly opposed this during the last month leading up to that meeting. And then tens of thousands of people turned out in Geneva protesting against it. And so they presented these amendments. They approved a lot that they wanted, but it remains in a non-binding format. They wanted to make it binding, but it's not binding. However, none of this will matter at all if the UN now declares a state of international emergency, having the Pact for the Future approved in September, because they're over the World Health Organization. So the UN could argue, since we are over the World Health Organization and we've been given these international powers, we can use that to work through the World Health Organization if we choose to do so during an international pandemic. Yes. So it was plan B, but it worked. They got essentially everything they want or need at the international level to try to pull this off. And the only thing that would stop it is if nations of the world pull out of the UN altogether. I'm hoping the US will do so, possibly Hungary, El Salvador under their new president, and also Argentina under their new president. So it's basically come down to those three countries, and the United States have been the major opposers of this. And of course, Israel has been at odds with the UN almost on a daily basis. And that's been quite obvious. Yeah, so that's kind of where things stand right now.
Yeah, so the scenario is, just for make sure everybody's in on our conversation here, everybody, I had reported, me and Doug and Vince had reported on the World Health Organization and everything they were trying to do. They got that stopped, but with the Pact for the Future, it gives Antonio Guterres the power to declare an emergency and then give the World Health Organization the authority to go out and to implement what they tried to do back earlier in the year. And our current administration, Harris and Biden, they are pro all of that. They supported it. They were, adding in some of the documents or something. I know they, like the 14 points you said or something like that, they were pushing this. And that's the salient issue to me in this election is globalism versus nationalism. Do we want to put somebody in office who is going to allow this to happen? I mean, they're pro Antonio Guterres, who is at one point in time, he was the #1 socialist on the planet. And our current administration is pro giving him the power to declare an emergency and basically being a global dictator. And then we have another candidate who is saying, basically, no, that's not going to happen. And we really would have the potential here in America for Donald Trump to say, no, we're going to withdraw and we're going to quit funding you. I can see him doing that. So that's kind of where what we're facing here. There's a million other issues. I get it. But for somebody to just say, okay, I want one thing I can look at and understand, to me, that's really the crux of all of it, staring us in the face come next Tuesday.
No, you're absolutely right. And again, the Biden-Harris administration actually was involved in helping to draft some of these documents. So if you're wondering if they would support it, they've already shown that they do because they were involved in it from ground zero. So there's that. But also, like you alluded to, Antonio Guterres, who is now the UN Secretary General, he's the former president of Portugal. And while he was president of that country, during part of that time, he was also the director, the international director of the Socialist International. That is the mothership of all of your most prominent Marxist, communist, socialist organizations in the world. He was the head of it, and he is now the head of the UN. So it's no wonder that he stands where he does on the issues, because you look into his background a little bit and you find out what this guy is all about. Then there's Tedros Ghebreyesus, the Director General of the World Health Organization. He's a former Marxist socialist revolutionary leader from Ethiopia. And there's a lot of bloodshed there because of what he did there. And he maintained close ties even back then with China. So what was his reward? He was made Director General of the World Health Organization. So you could argue that these are two, if not the two most powerful people in the UN system, definitely among the two top. You could argue that some of the people in UNESCO also are very powerful, but they're cut from the same cloth. These people are all international socialist, communists, globalists, and they want to force this global system of government upon us, the American people. And right now we somewhat stand in the way of it. Although not so much during the current administration, but if Trump gets in, they see that would be a major obstacle. So I just want to say this. Yeah. If Trump gets elected, they still have 2 months before he would come into the White House. Who knows what they might try to do during that time. But if he could actually move into the White House and be sworn in again as president for a second time, what might happen after that? The leftists are going to do everything they can to thwart anything that Trump does. So this battle isn't going to stop. It's going to be nasty. We are in a spiritual battle that's being played out in the political realm, put in simple terms. And so we really need to pray for Trump and his closest advisors, both for their safety and also for their boldness, that they would be courageous and do the right thing, regardless of what is thrown at them. And I think here in this country, it's possible that a lot of this is going to unfold, David, on a state-by-state basis. There are certain states, they're all in with the UN, like California, a good part of New York, the New England countries. But there are other states that have really taken a strong stand and have drawn kind of a line in the sand. States like Arkansas, South Dakota, Florida, and some others. And so it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. But the first step is to get Trump in there. We definitely don't want Harris in there because we know she'll put all of this on steroids, and it'll be fast forwarded, and we'll be in a world government system before you know it.
Yeah, the one of the points you made about Guterres and the head of the World Health Organization, I call him Tedros because I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but Marxist, and then Kamala Harris having the Marxist background. A lot of people have called her a socialist, and the liberal media just laughs. Oh, she's not a socialist. She's just a good old girl from California. But the fact is, she does have a Marxist background, and so she's going to comply with everything they tell her to do. You know, we're not going to have time to get into all of it, but we talk about puppets and puppet masters. A lot of these, she's just a figurehead that's going to be put in there. She's going to do exactly what she's told. She's going to be like a rubber stamp on all of it. I mean, when Antonio Guterres says, hey, there's an emergency in the world, America, you do this, she's going to say, as a Marxist who's on board with all of this, well, okay, American population, Antonio Guterres just said this, he has the power, so we have to abide by it. I don't want that to happen in America, but it looks like that's what's coming down the pike. So, there's so much more we could talk about, Gary, and we'll have to do it on a future segment, central bank digital currencies and the global economic system, more world religion. But I've got about probably 45 seconds left, and I want you to have closing remarks here. Maybe give me 30 seconds of a final thought.
Sure. Amos 5:15 tells us to hate evil, love good, and maintain justice in the courts. Then perhaps the Lord God Almighty will have mercy. And I think that speaks to our current political situation. There is a right and wrong, and we need to vote for those candidates who most closely represent our Judeo-Christian moral values. Because if we go in the other direction, we shouldn't expect to receive mercy from God as a nation. So there is hope for the world. That hope ultimately is only in Jesus Christ. Amen. And it's our hope for eternity. And so I have my hope and trust in him.
Amen. Well, thank you very much for joining me, Gary, and I look forward to next time. God bless, my friend.
Thank you, Dave.